This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hi, everyone. It's Rebecca, and today I am chatting with author, editor, and publisher Lee Thompson. Lee was born and raised in Moncton, New Brunswick, and has had fiction published in 5 anthologies and in more than a dozen literary journals across Canada and the U.S. His most recent novel, Apastoral, a Mistopia, was published last year and won the fiction prize at the 2022 New Brunswick Book Awards. When not writing, Lee is a busy editor and book designer and is the publisher and founder of Galleon Books, a small literary publishing house. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you. Great to talk to you, Rebecca.
Great, thank you. Well, I was just saying to you before we started to record that I've been at the podcast for 4 years, and I have wanted to talk to an editor for so long because I am absolutely fascinated with what you all do in working with authors. And sometimes, authors will thank their editors. And yet, if I've ever asked questions about them, they don't say a lot about their editors publicly, I guess, to at least in interviews and stuff. So I'm really excited to chat with you. But I'm going to start right now, though, with asking first a little bit about you. And if you could tell us a little bit about your background and what path you followed to become a writer, an editor, and a publisher.
Yeah, I mean it's great. It's great to talk to you. Those two things, how I became an editor and a writer, and eventually a publisher. I guess that's three things. They're really very much entwined, and they were not planned. In my mid-20s, I was not a reader. In my mid-20s, I started reading quite a bit, and that eventually led to me thinking that I wanted to be a writer. I was a little bit lost in life in terms of what do I want to do. I had been a musician, and before that I was in visual arts, and neither of those really clicked. But I was always thinking in stories, and once I started reading a lot, I started getting a feel for that this is me, and this is something I could do quite well. It took some time, but I was a very adventurous reader, and that led to me being a very adventurous writer, trying a number of different styles and always wondering why something worked. Why did this sentence work? Why did this paragraph? Why did this rhythm work when others didn't? And that type of close attention to just language and how things really work. I'm not formally trained at all, but if you're attentive enough and curious enough and look into things, you can learn a lot. And that was really it for me, this attention to detail on why and how things work, both in my writing and in editing. And that led to me eventually seeking feedback, but also giving a lot of feedback. More and more writers were asking me to give my opinion, friends who were writers on their writing.
So that's really fascinating that you weren't necessarily a reader, but then this is the career path you've chosen, which is all about books and readers, etc. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I consider I wrote my juvenilia in my mid to late 20s. I got that out of the
Wow.
way, and by I think I first published when I was 29. So my goal was to get that by the time I was 30. I first wrote a story around when I was 27, and I had some successes right away. And I remember I had a story in a very important, so to speak, anthology for the region when I was just my third published story, I think. And the editors were saying, well, agents can be all over you for this, but I didn't have much else. I had some good stories, I had a few bad stories, but I was still finding my way. But it was a good boost.
Yeah. So when you went to school, did you have a plan what you wanted to do and then that just went out the window? So what were you thinking you might do?
I really didn't know. I didn't have a lot of direction. I had some
Mhm.
talent in visual arts. I thought, actually, I wanted to, study visual arts. I took that in high school. I'd done all the, I'd applied to university, got accepted in a program. But I didn't really have any vision as an artist. I was very young, 17. But I also thought I'd take a writing course at the same time. So that interest was there, even though I wasn't much of a reader.
Yeah.
But It took a while. I was a little lost as a person trying to find their way until my mid-20s.
Yeah. Now, I have a copy of your book, Apastoral, but I haven't finished it yet. And so, and I really wanted to be able to ask questions about it, but I just couldn't get it finished by the time we did this interview. But can you tell us what the book is about and what prompted you to write this very thought provoking novel? Because I think it's really unique.
As I started writing, I started to find my niche. Sorry, in because I read a lot. Doesn't mean I can always pronounce the words correctly. Niche. And very odd fiction, humorous fiction, stuff that draws from dreams. But in this case, it was always the challenge of what's it like to be. And I've always been fascinated with how do other people think? How do other people see the world? And how we talk past each other sometimes or interpret one event in two very different ways, or three or four. And with this story, it was the idea, how do animals perceive the world? And I realized, short of writing, Watership Down or something like that, or an outright allegory like Animal Farm, how could I do this? How could I tell a story from an animal's perspective? And I decided that I wanted to put a person's brain, that perception, that ability to think inside an animal's body, and but they still have the animal's hindbrain connected. So this whole story of this is a new way to punish criminals. And there's this technology that exists, and somewhere in the future, that you can take a criminal's, in this case, a man who is accused of murder falsely, and put his brain inside a sheep. And this is a new program called Constock. And this is kind of an absurd, mad, crazy world where this is permitted, and it's entertainment in some ways. But at the same time, to tell the story from this character whose name is Bones, what's it like for him to actually go through this? And there's two storylines: how he ends up in this position, and him in this position trying to somehow, find justice, which isn't really, it's, oh, I don't want to give everything away, but just
Yeah.
the procedure is irreversible. So he has to come to terms with this, and it's just how do I tell this? And it's going to be a lot of fun trying to do it. And I loved writing the book. And it was about 10 years ago that I wrote it, maybe 12.
Yeah. And so was this a story that you had kind of in your head for a while before you, well, if it's been 10 years that you before you published it, so were you just sort of working on it for a while and setting it aside? How did that process take place?
Yeah, I found a document a few months back in 2009 I'd written, and I outlined the first few pages. And I had forgotten about that. But then I really started writing it in 2010, 2011, spent 2 years or so. And then I thought, well, this is a wonderful idea. Publishers are going to leap at this. And I was surprised that they were cautious. And so I tried 7 or 8 different publishers. And I'm not the type of writer who I'll just bombard. I won't send 100 different manuscripts out and hope for one. I choose selectively. It's good for the soul. You don't want to. I can't handle 25 rejections in a row. So try to be strategic. And so after a while, I didn't get that acceptance. I was a little surprised, but it's a tough competition out there. I took the manuscript to the Banff Writing Studio, which is a wonderful program. Had great feedback there, and that renewed my faith in it. But still, it didn't happen. I had a couple of very close calls, including one publisher who said, we've already published 3 New Brunswick authors. We need to publish more Ontario authors because we're an Ontario press. Otherwise, try us again in a year. Yeah, but eventually Corona Samizdat Press came up, and I was vouched for by another one of their authors. And it was a very simple process. I didn't even have to go through the approval stage. It was just like, my friend Jeff Bursey says, the manuscript's good enough, for our press. And then the publisher, Rick Hirsch, said, I'll take it. Simple as that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad it was published because like I said, I'm only a little ways into the book, but it just is really a book that I think has so many layers to it. There's the obvious, just the story, which is really compelling, but then there are all these layers to it, and I can't wait to get it finished, and I'll report back. But I'm sure I'm going to love this. It has gotten great reviews, so
Hope you do enjoy it.
yeah. Oh, I know. Well, I love the idea of animals and humans and that relationship and the things that we get from animals and the things that we take from them. And I just think when I saw what the book was about, I immediately purchased a copy because it's really the kind of thing I like to explore in literature. So and I love like Watership Down and many other animal books. So yeah, I'm really excited. And I do want to encourage everybody to take a look at that book. Make sure you go out and get a copy.
There's a bit more swearing in mine than Watership Down, but
Oh yeah. I don't care about that. That never has bothered me. I used to be a bartender back in the day, so yeah, it's no problem there. Now, I wanted to ask you just because as an author, and then we'll talk more about your editing process here in a minute, but I just wondered who advises or edits your writing?
it's a good question. For the longest time, I was part of a few writing groups,
Mhm.
and I'm not any longer involved in those groups. But so I think I sometimes I'll send things out to friends. I mentioned Jeff Bursey. He's taken a look at work of mine in the past. And I know I have a few people who would certainly, but I think my biggest source of feedback right now is my partner, Cindy, who was for the past 7 years or so has read pretty much everything I've written and so provided some wonderful feedback. She's not a writer, but she certainly can write and has a wonderful mind.
Yeah. I've always wondered that about book groups that way or writing groups. That do you ever I don't know if you can answer these some of these questions I might ask, but do you ever have someone provide feedback to you where you maybe don't respect their writing or their opinion as much? And then how do you manage or do you end up sometimes getting positive feedback where you think, "Are they being really clear and honest about the feedback?" Like, I writers groups really fascinate me. I'm not a writer, so I'm just kinda curious how that dynamic works.
There's lots of dynamics there, and the groups I've been part of for a long time have been very. One was more of a social group, but one was a very closely, tightly knit group with many published authors in it, and the feedback was generally very sincere. And it can be tough at first if you really love something and someone doesn't. But if you're going to get anywhere as a writer, you have to take feedback. You have to be your own harshest critic. And you also have to, take the good stuff too and accept it as, this really is a good story. People can be as tough on themselves in terms of accepting that something is good as they can be in terms of accepting a bit of, direction. It's challenging, but you learn to, know who is giving you the most valuable feedback and who is maybe just wanting to say some nice things. Not everyone, but and in those groups, the best thing always to do afterwards was to send it. Please send me the manuscript and I'll give you more feedback. Or you sent it in advance. But yeah, you just everybody has their own advice, and you learn to pick out what really works for you, and learn to listen.
Boy, I feel like that would just be I really, really love and respect and admire authors. I don't have that skill set. So I always think to myself, if I were an author, I don't know how well I could handle feedback, like honest feedback. You know what I mean? Like I always think you've got to have a really strong sense of who you are. So maybe are all authors kind of that way that they can handle that feedback, or have you encountered authors who maybe struggle to get constructive feedback?
Yeah, authors they need to be able to handle criticism. You have to be your own worst critic, and a lot of creative writing schools, what they do is they teach writers to be able to edit themselves, to be able to look at themselves critically, and if you don't really have that, you're not. I mean, you can write, but you're not really going to reach those levels. I believe where you're improving and doing something a little different and discovering things about yourself and about what writing is and how it connects all of us. You're just going to be kind of pleasing a lot of people, maybe pleasing yourself, and that's fine if you're a type of writer who wants to just entertain, I guess purely. Yeah, you have to be able to take feedback. It's like life in general. In any creative process, you need to be able to take feedback and not take it too to heart, but just here I am. This is what I do. This is how I feel about things, and where does this fit in terms of my beliefs? And hopefully you grow.
Yeah, so really it sounds like it has to be a balance, right? It just has to be a balance. Because I especially as you're talking about creative people, I guess that's what you have to do is to find that sort of middle ground where you can accept feedback, but also be strong in your own point of view, right?
Yeah, yeah, not just be swayed by everything at the same time to build up reasons why you're doing what you're doing and why you believe in what you believe, and that comes with experience.
Yeah. Okay, so now I kind of want to get into your role as an editor because this is the thing that really fascinates me because I want to first if you can explain sort of like a general pitch to us about what an editor does, and then I'll have follow-up questions related to that.
Okay, it's it varies, right? There's so many different ways to edit things, and there's substantive edits, and there's copy edits, and there's proofreading, and there's these edits where you just tear things apart and you really try to give direction. But there's edits where you just tweak little things. It all depends on the shape of the manuscript and what the author is looking for. It's a tricky business because you're dealing with people's hearts and souls, and they're I work with a lot of first time writers, first time authors, and you have to give feedback that both encourages and builds up what they're doing, at the same time hopefully helps them improve and helps improve the manuscript. And it's happened from time to time where, not generally, but I haven't heard back from a client just because they were shocked by the comments,
Mhm.
or embarrassed. I had one author tell me that they did never responded because they were embarrassed by the number of corrections, and I said that's par for the course. So an author might be someone who's published a lot and just doesn't know why a story or a novel isn't working, or someone maybe just doing this for the first time. They have an idea, but they're having trouble with tense or character perspective or dialogue. So many different things that I face, and it can be an adult novel, it can be a novel written for children, it could be someone's PhD thesis. Yeah, it's pretty wide. I edit pretty much all comers. So
So, okay, so when somebody approaches you then, do they are they pretty clear about what they need? Because I hadn't thought about all the layers or all the levels you just talked about. So, would somebody maybe come to you and say, "It's the dialogue I'm having trouble with," or does somebody literally come with a whole book and say, you know, and it I guess that's the question. Do they know what they're coming to you for specifically, or sometimes is it, "Wow, you just now have this whole book that you have to try to slog" I don't wanna say slog through, but, you have to look at all those things you just talked about.
I think the more experienced writers, the ones who've had some publishing success or a lot of feedback, will often just say, I'm concerned about this aspect of the story." But by and large, just you're looking at the whole thing. And I will ask sometimes, are there certain things you're concerned about they really want me to pay attention to? I had an author ask me to look at how a certain section was woven between two time periods. But by and large, it's here's my book, edit it. Let me know what you think. I have concerns about this or that, but for the most part, you're looking at the whole thing. But someone might just want to proofread, and if I find things, I'll point them out. It's varied, but mostly it's a whole edit. You're looking at the whole thing.
Now, when somebody gets published or gets their book published, do you ever go back and read it and then think can you see your own feedback within that book if you do that, or do you just not? Like, you've seen enough of it, you let them go on and do their publishing thing, and you're kind of done with it from that point? Or can you see your efforts, I guess, in their manuscript?
That can be a very hands-on editor. So sometimes I'll actually rewrite passages. It's the best way to show how I think something could be done. I say it's a suggestion. So in that way, actually concretely, I can see my writing sometimes in another client's manuscript. And I might say, something like this, and they say, "Can I keep your line?" I said, "Of course you can." And some manuscripts go through 5, 6, 7, 8 different edits. As I send it back, the client does more. They send it back. I look at that. I suggest this. Depends on, time and finances, to be honest. I'm always very interested in what's happening to a client's book if it's been published.
So let's say that you get a book, like what's the maybe average length of time you might have a book that you're working with an author, or can it go on for like a year? Like what's the time? I have no idea what a time frame would be.
Yeah, it can go on for, you can, if you're doing a couple of edits, it might be over 4 or 5 months, because you send it back and then the client has to get it back to you and you get it back again. And, if there's a proofread as well, it depends on what services they want. But I've worked with some clients on, 3-4 years on a certain book. If they want to put that amount of time into it, then, I'm willing. Sometimes a very large, ambitious book will need quite a lot of time to work on it. And others, it's like you've done your one edit for me. That's all I need. Sometimes I'll read a comment saying, this book was good, but it needed an editor. And, even though I edited it, I might agree it did need more editing, but, it can be an expensive thing. And some clients
Yeah.
are shocked by what the cost is, but you know how long it takes just to read something. So to read something slowly, and then to comment, and then to rework stuff and think about it, it's a process.
Yeah. So when you're editing and you're also writing, so you're doing your own writing, is it can you do those things sort of at the same time, or do you need more time away from editing other people's work to come back to your own writing?
Now, I could do both at the same time. In theory, often time wise, I'm so busy with editing projects that there's not a whole lot of time for my own writing. But all the writing I've done in the past 7-8 years, even though I've had grants to allow me to focus on writing, I've been doing editing and writing at the same time.
Yeah. And then I have a question. I've always okay, so my background is, I'm a retired library director, but I was a youth librarian for a while at the beginning of my career. And it's so funny how many friends of mine would come to me and say, "Oh, I have an idea for a children's book." And they would say, "Can I get feedback from you?" And I'd say, "Sure," because I was pretty well read in children's literature. So I would say, "Sure." And then they would try to either have a picture book that needed to be like a novel, or a novel that really was kind of a picture book, you know what I mean? And it was really hard to try to tell people, and I was just telling them, not I certainly am not an editor or anything, but I thought, I have this experience of reading lots of children's books, and I kind of know what people check out and how that goes. So, do you ever have that experience with people thinking that writing for children is just really simple, and it's almost like writing for adults or something? Do you know what I mean?
Sometimes they oversimplify. I think the thing I find the most often with children's people writing for children's books is that they tend to oversimplify and not and leave out a lot of really interesting details that would really engage a child. And more often than not, I'm asking them to expand the story, to make it more, to bring out some details. And I know I worked on one that actually became a much longer book.
I think my last question for you, well, actually, it may not be my last because something else, you might say something that will trigger me, but I wondered if you ever read book reviews of the books you've edited, and have you ever thought, because boy, I'll tell you, I'm the kind of person that I think writers work so hard that I don't give bad reviews because I feel like I don't even have that talent. So I'm not going to bash somebody for something I can't even remotely do. So, but some people love to give those 1-star reviews. Now, if you see a bad review for a book you edited, do you ever take it kind of personally?
If there's a comment on the editing, I might, but I mean, yeah, like you said, there are these people who just want to give a 1-star or 2-star review for almost no reason. I haven't had much experience with that with the books I've worked on. I was very, pulling for those authors, and whether it's been a self-published book or something that's been picked up by a publishing house, just to see any review is great, because everybody's struggling and trying to just to get some recognition. And it's great when, people like yourself doing these podcasts. Give authors, like Jared Edson, you did a few weeks ago, just to give that spotlight.
Yeah.
And Jared's book's getting great reviews, and it's one of the ones that I published recently. And that impetus to publish was just to get these authors out here and get readers reading them. And yeah, it's a little bit off track from your question, but it hasn't happened too much that I've seen a bad review of something I've worked on. But I feel bad for the author if that happens. If it's unfair and it hasn't been, duly read, given its due.
I totally agree, and that's why I don't do it. And honestly, if I'm not really feeling a book at all, I don't finish it, and I don't say anything. I don't have to make any comments about it. But I do think sometimes people see that as kind of a funny thing to do, and I think about the person behind it who put their heart and soul into something and went through this whole process of editing and publishing and everything, and I just would never do that to an author. So you brought up the Jared Edson book, and that's one of the things that Tara, my partner, and I really want to do is we both love CanLit. I'm an American, she's Canadian, but we both really love CanLit, and especially these small presses or these authors who, have to, get their books out there. And that's one of the things we love doing is interviewing them and helping put the word out a little bit. We don't have a huge podcast, but we love anything we can do to help support Canadian authors who aren't the big names, right? Because they're going to get their publicity and everything. But that's one of the things we try to do is to help highlight those authors that we really enjoy that aren't the ones that will have a ton of publicity behind them, right? Now, my last question for you is what background would you recommend if somebody wanted to go into editing? What should they be doing to sort of follow that career path? I know yours was a little bit different, but is there something that people could do to sort of get a leg up, so to speak, on that whole process?
I mean, I think a lot of people go to school for it. I did not, which probably puts me in the minority. But yeah, just you have to love reading. You have to love reading widely too. And I think if someone who reads and you see why that comma shouldn't be there, or you see why that sentence doesn't work, and you have these thoughts on. But you can be, it's funny because you also have to be very fair because everybody writes differently. You can't try to shape everything you read into a certain style. So there's editors who are just they're copy editors. They just follow the rules and they write for and make sure everything's clear. But there's also editors like myself who really get inside a story. And so if you're reading and you think this story would have worked much better if this or that had happened, or if this character had not been there, or if this scene had been expanded, if you find you're that type of reader, then I think that's where the editor's bones really are, in that type of get inside the story and find out why it works and doesn't work.
So that makes me think though. So how do you keep your writing style separate from somebody who you're editing? That it just dawned on me because it's like you said, you might write it this way, but maybe that's not how they would do it. So you have to really get into the head of the author that you're editing and really understand what they're doing.
Yeah, and especially for an author like myself, I write in a lot of first-person narratives and different styles, so it's actually a bonus for me. I've been so involved in a client's manuscript, and in one case, he had very specific rhythms of speech, and I found I borrowed these in a story I was writing, but it was a character's voice, and it worked. And I ghost wrote a memoir recently, and with a very strong Newfoundland, Canada rhythm and accent. And I started writing a story, and I thought this is perfect for this character. So in my case, I just steal it.
That's okay. You just talked about ghostwriting. So tell me how that works. That's kind of interesting to me as well.
I've only done really one true ghostwriting project, and it was a series of interviews, and then taking those interviews and boiling down to the stories and trying to capture that voice, but at the same time making it coherent, because people ramble and tell stories in a very circuitous way. That's a lot of work, and I think it can be very expensive. This project took over a year, and wasn't even that large a book, but very rewarding in the end. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day, but yeah, it's I mean, I think everybody does it very differently, but you might do 1-2 ghostwriting projects a year if you're that's what you do. It's not really what I do, but if I'm asked,
So it's really, so I think of like some people, especially in the US, we have everybody now who's writing books about the former president here. I'm pretty sure they're not writers. So they're all coming out with their own books now. So probably, and it does say usually that they're working with someone. So basically, they could just be providing recordings of whatever, and then the ghostwriter's going in and putting it together, correct?
probably the most common way that is done. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say, you're probably all underpaid. All of you editors, ghostwriters, et cetera, you're probably all underpaid for what you do to bring great books to us ultimately. So, well, Lee, I just want to thank you so much for letting me ask a lot of random questions because, like I said, this is a really fascinating aspect of the writing process. And without editors, we wouldn't have all these great books that we have. So I just want to thank you so much for what you do and for our chat today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk about this. Very much enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.